Okay, where we left off last was we made a component for the status list, and the status list had an array of simple strings, and we used the map function to map over the array and pass each of those strings into the status component. So we have the app, which just has one component for the entire status list. We have a component for the status list, which has an array of strings, and this component uses map to feed each of those strings into the single status component. And the website looks something like this. So here's our list of all of the statuses. Well, what we would like to do is be able to add and create a new status. In order to do this, we're going to need to have a text input, and we're going to need to take the text from that input and add it to this list. So let's go back to the status list up here. The first thing we want to do is be able to actually write something in here. I think that this status list is actually doing a pretty good job of showing just the list. So I'm actually going to make a new component, and I'm just going to call it status all. And I'm going to copy some of this so that we get a good boilerplate to work from. And I'm going to rename this thing status all. And my idea here is I want this thing to be responsible for showing the list of statuses, but also showing an input. So I'm actually going to make a form and have an input in here of type text, and a button of type submit, and then we want to have all of the status list below this. So I'm trying to make a new component that is going to manage the statuses and allow us to add a new one. And I want to leave the status list so its responsibility is just to show the list of statuses. In the constructor, we usually want to throw in props here. And I'm going to grab the list of statuses that we used to have in the list and throw it here in the props. So that now the status list, instead of it referring to the state of statuses, it's actually going to refer to props. So now this component actually is super simple. Okay, so here we're doing a good job of importing the statuses, or the status list. We're rendering this all correctly. We're probably going to need to go up to the app and replace this. So the app doesn't show the status list anymore. It shows status all. And when we say all, that means it's going to allow us to enter new statuses and display the statuses that are already there. And I'm just going to rearrange my tabs here. I like to keep things in order from the app, and it just gets more specific down. It just helps me reason about things. So let's see what this looks like. If we refresh our page right now, we should see the form and the input to enter a new status. I'm going to put some headers on this. Let's see what it looks like. So I like it. I don't like that this is all white here, and we have some boxes. So I'm actually going to fix that by changing the way that, changing the way that div is wrapped around everything. So really, I just want one div for the form, and I want another div over here. So this status div is the one that gives us that nice outline. And there is a little error here. So we have generally two divs. It turns out that React doesn't like it when we try and return two divs. What this error is saying is JSX elements must be wrapped in one enclosing tag. So we have two options here. We can make a new div that just wraps around everything here. And that's actually how to get around this error. JSX really does have a strict rule where we can only return a single div. So it was mad that there was actually two top-level divs here. But if we go back, now we have a little bit of nice separation over here. Yeah, I think that looks fine. So let's draw our attention to the text input. We want to be able to type into here, and we're able to do that. But we need a way to get what we type into the actual state of our application. So the way we do that is we can go to our input here, and we can actually say that the value of this is equal to something that's on the state of our application. So I'm making a reference to a new property on our state called new status text. And let's go ahead and make that up here. I'm actually going to start it as a value just to show that this gets in the application. And here it is. So now we've actually said we've used React to bind the value of the input to something from the state of our application. But what we're going to notice here is I'm actually pressing delete now. I'm trying to select this text and delete it, and I actually can't change it at all. The reason for that is React has defined this input to show what the value of that piece of the state is. So if we look over here again, when we said the input exists here, we said that the value of that input, by value we mean the value of the text inside of it, we said the value is equal to this property on the state. So what's actually happening is React won't let us change this because we are not actually changing the state of the application yet. In order to change the value of the text inside the input, we need to actually modify the state of the application. Here's how we do that. We can add a new property, a new attribute to the input, and we can call it onChange. And what we need to do is this is going to fire every time that we actually type something into the input. So whenever someone tries to type something else in, we need to call our own function. I'm going to call it this.handleChange. So we need to actually make a new function in our class which takes in an event, and we want to use this.setState so that the new status text is equal to event.target.value. And let's debug this. So what's going to happen is every time we press a key, it's going to trigger an event, and that event is going to fire our handleChange function. When the handleChange function is run, we get the event property, and we can access values off of that. So there's the event itself. Target refers to the HTML element that's associated with the event. In this case, target is actually going to become the input value. And now we can ask for the value of the target. So we're asking, target is the input element, and we can ask for the value, which is the value on the input. And let's go ahead and console log this out before we really look at it. ev.target.value. This is just going to make it easier for us to investigate. I'm going to open up my Chrome DevTools. There's another error here. This is something I don't think I mentioned earlier. We'll cover it again later. It says every child in an array or iterator should have the unique key property. What that means is we messed up in our map function. It turns out that React wants us to identify each of these with a special, any sort of unique identifier. So what I just did here is in the map function actually gives us two parameters. It feeds us the things it's mapping over one by one, and we can also add a second parameter, and that will tell us what the index is of this map. So the error was we're creating all these status elements, but React wants to be able to tell them apart. And it does that by using this key property. We'll talk about that again the next time we create lists. But for now, what we're trying to investigate is changing the text here. So if I press something, I'm going to add an exclamation point. What we see is the exclamation point is there briefly. And we're able to investigate. We can look at what EV is. So here it says it's a synthetic event. And we can investigate more about it. So I'm going to say ev.target. And when we access ev.target, it looks like we actually have a reference to that input element. And if we ask for the value, well, now we have the value of what we typed in. So what's happening here is we're accessing the text that was typed in on the element, and now we're using it to set the state. So we're actually accessing the value that happened on that input and overriding the previous state. This actually is complaining now that it says it can't read set state of undefined. And that has to do with the context of this function. So handle change, when we refer to this.handle change, the this keyword is not the same as the this of the class. So what we need to do to fix that is say this.handle change is equal to this.handle change, bind it. So basically when this class is created, we're overriding handle change and binding it so it always refers to the this of this class. So this function is necessary so that when we call it down here, it still refers to the class and it doesn't refer to the context of this when the change is happening. So if I refresh this, now we can add text and it actually renders it. So the big difference here is before we were trying to type in the input, but we were not updating the state of the application. And since the input said that the value of it was equal to the state of the application, we weren't seeing any changes. So what we've done now is we added the onChange attribute to the input so that whenever someone changes it, it's going to fire this function, which gets the new value of what it is on the page, and it actually sets the state and modifies that inside our application. So whenever you have an input you need to run it through something like this. You need to actually detect when someone is typing into it, and you do have to manually update the state of the application. So now we can type here, and we're able to do that. So the takeaway here is anytime you have an input, you should make the value the state of the application, and you need to attach an onChange listener, which picks off the value whenever someone starts typing and actually updates the state of the application. In the next video, we're going to look at how to hook this up so that when we click Add Status, it will actually add it to the list of statuses. Okay, now that we're able to modify this text here, we want to be able to click the Add Status button and have it appear in the list below. One thing to notice right now is when I click Add Status, we're actually going to see the page refresh. So you'll see my not my semicolons, my exclamation marks disappear. I click Add Status, and the page flickered up here. It actually refreshed. So the first thing we're going to want to do is make the page not refresh. But actually, I guess the real first thing we want to do is modify it so that when we click on this button, we get some control over the code. So here's how we do that. Just like the input button had an onChange hook, the form, we can have a onSubmit. So I'm going to make a new function called handleSubmit. And I'm going to write that up here just below handleChange. I'm going to call it handleSubmit. And I'm going to give it the event property. And if you're familiar with vanilla, regular HTML and JavaScript, what you might know is that when a form is submitted, a form traditionally takes you to another page. For instance, if you went to log in on Facebook, you would enter your username and enter your password. And when you clicked login or pressed enter, well, that's inside of a form, and the form actually takes you to another page. So the default behavior of a form when you finally submit it is for it to actually navigate you to another page. If you've used JavaScript and jQuery in the past, what you know is we can prevent the default behavior. So here our function is called handleSubmit, and we have access to an event. Well, what we can call is we can say ev.preventDefault. And this is a function that will actually prevent the form from taking us to a new page or refreshing. We will simply stay on the page. So normally a form would take us to another page, like when you click login and then you enter Facebook and see all your activity. But here, we just want to take advantage of the submit hook on a form, so we know when someone's done typing their status and they hit enter or they hit submit. And we don't want the page to refresh. We don't want to go to a new page. Instead, we just want to take the information they entered and we want to add it to the rest of our information on the page and just have the page stay right where it is. So really, in the submit, if we look at the state of our application, what we want to do is we want to take the new status text that someone is entering and we want to enter it into the array over here. And we probably want to update the new status text as well. So here's what we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to say let new statuses equal an array which has this.state.newStatusText, and we're going to get all the old statuses. This.state.statuses. I'm using this triple dot, which is a spread operator, which will take this whole array and spread it out as if it were individual items in this new array. Finally, I'm going to say this.setState to say statuses is now equal to these new statuses. I think there's one more thing that I said we want to do on this state. Well, we want to reset the status text so that it's some default. What this is going to allow someone to do is it takes the text that they did enter, it's going to move it to this array of all the statuses, and it'll appear in the list, and it's going to reset that box as well. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to say, I watered my plant. Here it says it can't read property state of undefined. Whenever we see an error like this, it's not really complaining about the property state. It's saying that something else was undefined. So here it says it can't read property state of undefined. So if we look down here, we see that here's state. We're trying to access state. But what it really means is that the this keyword was undefined. So it's saying it can't read state off undefined, which was this. What this is a symptom of is, again, we're in a function that reacted to an event, and whenever things react to user input, really, we want to bind those functions. So just like we bound the handle change function, we want to bind the handle submit function. So the reason for that is here in the form, well, the submit, that function is really going to come from outside the class because the browser is going to detect when someone submitted the form. So in the context that when this actually executes, the this keyword is different. So when the onSubmit fires, this is a different context than it is in our class. But by binding it, we're actually able to make sure that the this keyword stays so that it references our class. Now that we've bound it, let's see if this works. I watered my plant. So there we go. We actually were able to submit the button, and the form took the text that we had in our state, and it added it to this array. Notice that I did make sure to add it to the beginning of the array, so it appears at the top and kind of goes down in reverse order. I just think that's a nice way to do things. And we reset the text so that it doesn't say what we just typed in here now. It's actually ready for them to type something else. And now that we have that infrastructure, I think I'm ready to get rid of the new text in here. So let's just say that instead of new text, it's just going to be blank empty string. And as soon as we do that, the input did actually have this placeholder. So now we can add anything we want. I'm going to say walked the dog. And we can enter that, and as soon as we submit the form, it adds it to all the statuses down here and clears the input, so it's ready for something else. So let's just review the structure of our application. Overall, we have, I'm going to start from the top and go to the bottom. We have the app, and we have 3 components. We have a component called status all, which is responsible for having this form, and the form allows us to enter in a new status, and it allows us to move that status to the list of all the statuses. Now, this component also brings in the status list, and whereas status all is responsible for maintaining the list of all the statuses, and it's responsible for letting us add new things to the list, well, the status list component is much simpler. It simply accepts the statuses via a property and renders them. So the status list is only responsible for accepting the list of statuses and then using map to render them in the status component. And we made sure to add this key property because React complains if things rendered in a list don't have a unique identifier. And now the status component itself does have some functionality here. Remember that we are able to keep track of how many likes it has, and it has a small render method which defines what a status looks like and what happens when we click the like button. So there we go. We've got something that allows us to enter statuses. It maintains the list of statuses, and we can see them all on the page. In the next video, let's set ourselves up so that we can delete statuses. Let's figure out how to delete statuses. Number one, we're going to want to put something in the UI that just gives us a target point to click on. I'm thinking maybe we could give ourselves a little X button up here that allows us to delete it. So let's start with that. To do that, I'm going to change the position of the div that contains the statuses to be relative, and then we can add a absolutely positioned X button in the top right corner over here. So let's build that up first. Let's go to our component. Let's go to our status. And I think now we actually are going to have some sophisticated CSS for this. So I'm going to make a new file called status.css. And I'm going to capitalize it just because everything else in here is capitalized. Let's see. It looks like we already have some status in our app CSS. So I'm going to cut that out of the app, close the app, paste that in here. And let's make sure that when we bring in our all status, we go ahead and import status.css. So I want to make the status position be relative, and now I'm going to make status.close have a position of absolute, top 0, right 0, and let's go ahead and make our font size be maybe something like 30 pixels. So if you're unfamiliar with just a quick CSS refresher, what position relative does is it allows us to position things inside this div according to how far from like the top of the box they should be, or how far off the sides or the bottom of the box they should be. So if let's see, I need to change my import over here because I wanted to show you what it looks like on the screen. So here's the box, and by saying that this entire box is relative, we're saying that things inside the box now can be positioned relative to where this box lies. So when we said that the close class is positioned absolutely, that means it's going to have an absolute position in this box. That absolute position is going to be 0 from the top and 0 from the right. So our X is going to appear right over here. Well, let's go back to the status component and add ourselves a div with a class name of close and put an X there. And as soon as we have that, we see that these X's are here. I'm going to add a little bit more styling to that. I think we should have a little bit of padding, maybe 5 pixels of padding. And also I want the cursor to say pointer. so that when we hover over this, it looks like something that we can click on. So we can actually add an onClick to just about anything. So here I have a onClick on that new div, and I said we're just going to have it called delete. So let's try this and open up our console. It says that if we click on this, we should fire a delete function, and that actually worked. Great. I actually thought we were going to have to bind that, but it looks like we don't. But if we're looking inside here, although that we are able to add the X button inside the template for that status, which is fantastic, what does it really mean to delete the status? Because in this component, we're a little bit too far down. If we look at the state of this component, the only thing we really have control over here is the amount of likes for that single status. In fact, in order to delete this, we would need reference to the array of all the statuses. And that's all the way up here. So if we look at the arrangement of this again, here's the status all, which has the list of arrays, and that passes the statuses to the status list, which renders those things through the props. And then in status, we're basically 2 layers down from being able to even manipulate anything with that list. So here's what we're going to want to do. We need to build a function called delete all the way up on top in the status all component where the array lives. So what we really want to do is, since the status all is responsible for maintaining the array, we should have a delete method up there. And the delete should refer to a index because it needs to know which status to delete. And what we want to do from there is, let's say that we have a copy of the statuses, and I'm going to use the spread operator. In React, it's a good idea to not manipulate. We can't manipulate this thing itself. We want to make a copy of things, manipulate the copy, and then reset things. That just saves us from different sorts of bugs in our application. So I want to copy the entire array. Then I want to splice out of the array. And I want to splice something from the index. And I want to delete one of them. I'm definitely reading this tooltip over here. So what splice does is it removes elements from an array. And we specify where we want to start in the array and how many we want to delete. So we're saying that we're going to start at the index provided and delete just one thing. And now what we want to do is we want to say this.setState so that status is equal to our new copy where we deleted something. So from the perspective of status all, we've made a method which accepts an index and removes something from the array. What we want to do now is we want to make this method available all the way down to the status component. So what we can do that is we can basically thread it all the way down. Think of it like a needle and thread. What we're going to say is the status list has access to the statuses, but it also has access to this delete function. So we're passing the delete function as a property into the status list. Now, in the status list, we need to keep passing it through to the status, because the status is where we have that actual X where we want the delete to occur. So we can say, just keep passing it. Here's a property called delete, and it's equal to this.props.delete. So the delete from the perspective of the status list came through as a property, and we're just continuing to pass it as a property to the status. Now, we can keep our delete function here, and when they click delete, we can say this.props.delete, and we do need to give it an index. So how does the status know the index? Well, we were passing the key as an index over here, so that would be nice, but I don't think we have access to that. Let's play around with that for a second. Let's just say this.props. I'm going to say this.props.key and this.props. I really don't think we have access to key. Let's take a look. So if I click delete, it can't read props of undefined. I think now this means that we do have to actually bind this. This.delete equals this.delete.bind. And it does give us a warning here. It says key is not a prop. Trying to access it will result in undefined. If you need to access the value, you should pass it as a different prop. So as it turns out, even though React forces us to use that key property, it does not actually pass that down. So we need to pass that down as another name ourselves. I'm just going to call it index. So now, we have the status. We're giving the index as the key, so React knows how to uniquely identify this. But we're also passing the index down just so the status knows what itself is. Because if we didn't pass the index, well, the status wouldn't know where it appeared in the list. It would just know what its text was. So we have the index, and we also keep passing forward that delete function. So now in the status, instead of referring to the key, we should be able to refer to index. And let's see how this works. Here it says index 0. That looks good. Let's try the first one. This one should be 0, 1, 2. Let's try this one. So I'm ignoring the errors for now, but we're just verifying that the index is actually correct. And it is indeed. Now it looks like we're getting another error that says property statuses of undefined. And that's on the delete. It looks like it's up here in the status all. And I'm going to assume that we just need to bind this. So I'm clicking on it. This is definitely executing. Let's follow it back up. We did not pass in the index to the delete function. So let's pass it in here. This.props.index. So we're not passing in the index to that delete function. I'm going to try and delete the first one. Still doesn't work. Let's debug this. I love the debugger keyword because it really just kind of snaps you right to where you want to be. I'm going to hover over here. Index looks okay. And let's go ahead and step into that function. And let's see what copy is. Copy is the, looks like a successful copy of the array. And let's try to splice it. And let's see what copy became. So here, I'm verifying that there's only 3 things left in copy now. And I believe this is where our mistake is. We just have a typo. So it was statuses. We got to fix that so it says statuses. So we made the copy correctly, we spliced it correctly, and we just made a typo when we were trying to set the state. So let's fix that. Statuses. And I should probably delete that debugger, or else it's going to keep snagging us up there all the time. So we can delete the first one. That works successfully. And we can do that all day. When I'm testing things like delete, I like to especially, you should always try things at the beginning of a list, in the middle of the list, and the end of a list. Because sometimes you can have a bug in your program where you always click on the first one, and it might delete the first one properly, but it might not handle the middle or end cases correctly. So I'm going to try the end one. So happy to be learning React.js. Let's see if we can delete that. Great, that one's gone. I'm going to refresh the page. Finally finished that big project. Let's try to delete that one. Fantastic. Yeah, again, I'm just trying these in different positions because you absolutely can have nasty bugs where you don't test every case. And in fact, let's try and add one again. So I'm going to add walked the dog. I'm going to add walked the cat. And let's see if we can delete the dog. Great, we can delete the cat. Fantastic. Yeah. At this point, I hope you are seeing the power of React. If you're coming from jQuery land or vanilla JavaScript, we would have had to create all sorts of code just to handle how to identify each of these things, how to manipulate the DOM. But here, we've written really a small class that maintains an array of strings, and everything just kind of flows through React and is rendered. Yeah, React is actually very powerful. I would consider this a somewhat sophisticated application. Let's see what else there is to do. So we've got the statuses. We added the CSS. We're able to delete things. Well, let's make sure we can still increment the likes. That's good. There we go. I think that's actually pretty good. So now we've seen how to create components. We've seen how to enter text. We've seen how to click buttons and increment the state of things. I do want to draw attention to just the pattern of this. So we have one component which sits at the top, and we try to lift all of our state to the top. So the status all component is really responsible for maintaining the list of statuses, and adding new statuses and deleting statuses, and everything else is just passed through to these components. And those components, since these functions have been passed down, they can invoke those functions, which really goes all the way back to the top and modifies things at this top level and then has it trickle back down. So when we deleted something, well, the status all took the delete function and defined it. It passed it to the list. The list took the delete function from its properties and gave it as a property to the status component. And now the status component can refer to its own delete function, so that when we click on a div, now it calls the delete it received from its props. And so when the status component invokes that delete function, we go all the way back up to the top status all component. It performs the delete operation, which modifies the array, and now this information just trickles back down. React actually notices when the array is modified because we went through the setState function, and now the status list is going to re-render itself with the new information. So there's your first React app. I hope that you've found it useful and you're impressed by its power. In the next lesson, we are going to show some different tools. So far we've just used Create React App, which is a fantastic way to get started easily. But we're going to look at another tool called Parcel, which will allow us to build our applications slightly more manually and I do think a little bit faster.